We'll be going over array lists, iterations, and hash maps. So first, let's look at how to declare an array list. You want to use one, you've used one before many a times. The first thing that we want is declare the type. So I want an array list that holds some strings. That array list is going to be called my list. And we want to tell the computer to make that actual list and store it in that variable. If we make an array list, we can add stuff to it. So we can use the .add method. And you were able to write a .add method for an array list of your own creation during the lab. So you understand how the internals of an array list work and how things get added into an array list and where they are stored, which is really just an array inside of it. What's going to happen then is when we add these four things, we have hello, bye, good, and bad. All of them are strings inside of our array list. And then let's say that we want to go through this array list and we want to do stuff with it. We can use something called a for each loop. For each loop, as the name implies, it looks at each one of the things, and it is a for loop, and it checks all of them one at a time. So at first, if we want a for each loop, we're going to have to give it a type. In this case, it's going to be a string. We're going to use any name that you want for your variable name, and then we're going to give it the collection that you want to iterate through. So if you want to go through a list, you put the name of the list there. If you want to go through a hash map, if you want to go through a set, if you want to go through some other kind of different list, you can use any kind of collection with for each loop. So in this case, what's happening is that the for each loop is calling the get method from the array list and any collection that we use. In this case, we have an array list called my list. So we're going to call the .get method, and we're going to start at index 0, and it's going to return the thing that is at index 0, which in this case it's the string hello. So the inner for each loop, in this case it has a string. I'm going to call my variable word, and I'm going to use the collection my list. What's happening is that it's setting the .get 0 to whatever value that is. It's storing it in the variable that you told it to use. In this case, we start with get 0, and then once we're done doing stuff with that variable, then we can go ahead and go to the next one, which is get 1, and then get 2, and get 3, and it's going to continue to do this until there are no more things to get. And it's going to know that the index has reached the end of the collection, and it's going to stop iterating through it. Now, for each loops are really good for when you want to look at everything inside of the collection, and you want to do it one by one, and you want to make sure that you didn't miss anything as you're going through it. If you want an alternative of going through a collection, you can is just do the .get method yourself and then store it in your own variable. So in this case, we start with index 0. Then we're going to say while that index is less than the total size of this list, get the object at that position and then store it in a variable called name and then do stuff with it. Once you're done doing stuff with it, we're going to increase index by 1, and we're going to do this again until we get to the end of the list. Both for each loop and this one do the same exact thing. The for each loop is just sort of a cleaner version, and it helps you not have to write as much code, but it also limits you to having to look at each thing one at a time, whereas the while loop lets you look at things more than once. So as we're going through it and the index increases, we're looking at the next thing. But let's say that we wanted to look at two things at once. Then we can go call get 2 times. Name 1 is get index, and then name 2 is get index plus 1. And instead of increasing the index by 1 and looking at the next one, we're going to increase the index by 2. So we can look at every 2 things and then do stuff with 2 things. But what if we wanted to search? We're like going to do something slightly more useful than just looking at everything. We want to check for something. We're looking for Bob. So the name being searched is Bob. We're going to start the index at 0. We're going to continue to look through the list until the index is not less than the size. So once the index is greater than the size, we're going to stop. We're going to get the first name, we're going to get the second name, and then we're going to check if name 1 equals to the name being searched, in this case Bob. If it is, we're going to do stuff. If it's not, then we're just going to increase the index by 2 and we're going to continue looking through this list. Imagine that there's 10 million things in this list. And imagine that Bob is the last string in this list. It's going to take us 10 million operations. And in this case, 10 million .get operations, 10 million lookups into the list until we get to that. And that's going to take a long time for the computer in some cases, especially the more complex things you're looking for. You could have a billion things and the last thing could be Bob, and it's going to take you a billion times to get there. So array lists can be really useful sometimes, but they can also be really slow when you're searching for stuff. So if you wanted to search for something much faster, you would use a hash map. In this case, hash maps have a key, which is a string, and then they have a value. In this particular hash map, that value is going to be an integer. So let's pretend that we are mapping names to ages. So Bob has an age of 10, Brian has an age of 16, and then somebody who goes by the name of OK has a name of 45. So we want to get Bob in a hash map. We understand from the lab that hash maps are able to just convert whatever you give them through the get into a number, and that number turns into an index, and then that index corresponds to the value that you want. So it's really, really fast to convert that string into a number and then just go look directly in that spot instead of having to go through the first 10 million entries and finally get to it. So it removes the need to have to look at anything. It just takes you directly to where you want because your hash function is able to do that for you. So in the upcoming problem set, you're going to need to do something with maps, something with array lists, and you're going to be searching for stuff and try to make sure that you use them correspondingly. You use the right collection at the right time, and you use the correct for loop or while loop at the correct time. You can also use other collections if you want. You don't have to just use the ones that we have here.